I've been thinking all week about the story in the Bible where Jesus is hanging out. And I know that, when we talk about any of the great master teachers, I know that we all kind of have different relationships with them. Jesus is one of those masters, and for some people it's a very personal relationship. And so I don't want to disrespect that in any way by asking us to consider Jesus for a moment as a metaphor, and what he was doing, to consider it as a metaphor and have a deep metaphysical meaning. So we have this individual who represents the archetype of the teacher and the healer, and the archetype of the one who stands the high watch of love. It seems to me that a great teacher, a great spiritual teacher, is someone that sometimes we haven't really caught up with. So we got this gentleman named Jesus a couple thousand years ago, and we're still struggling to catch up with his teachings. His teachings are so pure, they're so amazing. You can say that about a lot of people, the Buddha and Lao Tzu. I'm a big fan of Taoism, and I read those verses, and I go, wow, I got a long way to go in some of those, but they're just so beautiful. They speak to me. So one day Jesus is hanging out with a bunch of people, and he says, all these adults and everyone was around him, and he looks back there and he sees some kids back there. He says, hey, bring the kids to me. Let the kids come to me. And so the crowd parted, and the parents probably encouraged their children to come forward to this man who obviously radiated love and a charisma that we probably can't even imagine. I imagine him kind of a cross between Martin Luther King and Mr. Rogers, kind of. I think that's a good combination. I think a lot about that. What was his deal, I was raised in fundamentalist Christianity, and the way that I was always taught that in Sunday school, and I also went to religious schools, Christian schools, and they taught it that it showed his magnitude for everyone, and that he wanted to teach the children. And I wonder, and I've been coached on this with some of my teachers in metaphysics and religious science and New Thought and Centers for Spiritual Living. I think that the reality is that he wanted to learn from those children. And then secondly, I think that he wanted all those adults to hang out with those children and to be reminded of something. It's interesting, nearly every religious tradition there is talks about this idea of coming back to a softness in what we call our heart center. A softness around it. I think Jesus knew by looking at those good people, good solid people, hardworking people. Jesus hung out with blue collar people, hardworking people, I'm not disparaging anybody of any other, earning capacity or, station in life, but he was around. The 12 disciples nowadays, they'd be called day laborers. They were guys who worked on boats. The gentleman identified in the New Testament, Joseph, who was a carpenter, was probably somebody who, was out on a job site, building walls and stuff like that. He was working out of a union hall, probably, That's who Jesus hung out with. But he knew good people, but over time, with some of the experiences we have around the heart, can sort of harden. Around the heart can sort of get tough and kind of be, we start being closed with it, In my line of work, I'm trained to look at body language a lot, I see people sometimes I'm working with, you're sitting across the table and they're kind of closed down, and I get it, I get it. They've been kind of kicked around a little bit or whatever. They've been through some hard stuff, and I try really hard, and I don't always succeed to get it to open up, just open up. Because those kids, when they came up to Jesus, that they were just like playing, I mean, they can only listen to the dude so long. And then they got to be playing. They got to be throwing a ball around. They got to be chasing. They got to, a game of tag would break out, or a game of hide and seek, or they'd be chasing butterflies or whatever. They're so spontaneous, but I think Jesus was into that, the spontaneity. Because I believe that there's an intuition that happens when we open up. We ask the question, what is there to learn from that? Everyone in this center is working on a book or a lot of people are, not everyone, but the Heart Math book, and I was looking in it, and one of the sections, and I apologize because I meant to write the number of the section I was looking at and I omitted it, but I brought something out of it, so I'll give you my version and you can look for it if you want to, It says one of the intentions of this part of the book, that particular part of the book, is to increase our connection to heart intelligence. That's really interesting. So Jesus says, hey, have the kids come up here and play. Because there's something to learn here. There's an intelligence here of some kind. I was thinking about I'm one of those guys, I like watching nature documentaries. BBC America, I love that stuff. Planet Earth and all that. And I was thinking about this one that was centered on the lioness sisterhood of this one pride of lions in Africa. So they got the male, the old guy, he's got one eye because he's been fighting so much, and he's kind of beat up, but he's still pretty tough, so he's running the pride, They got him hanging around. The rest of them are lionesses, and in this particular case, they were sisters. Mom was still around. She was young enough that she was still running the show, but we've got these adult sisters. And they talk about how these sisters grew up together. And after they were born, the first thing they did, I don't know, they call them a litter with cats, I don't know. Anyway, whatever they are, a bunch of them come out, they're in the world. And the first thing they start doing, once they're kind of, stop wobbling around, is they start tugging on each other and tugging each other's tails and ears, and they start playing with each other and slapping each other around, chasing each other. And so the science people who are really smart about this thing, they say there's something starting to happen even in this play. And it's not just that they're going to be someday active predators. There's something about, they call them the sisterhood. So they're playing with each other. And they play and they play and they play and they play. And they get all tired out and then they collapse in a big heap all over each other. And they lay there, either in the shade of the sun. And they're yawning on each other and rolling over each other. And it's this incredible bond, this incredible love. And then later on, as they get older, some of the play is replaced by grooming each other. And spending time laying together, just being together. Play, grooming, laying together. Isn't that what kids do? That's what Jesus brought up. That's what they were doing. And when they were all tired, they just fell in a heap on each other. And so what the science people say about this is that someday, when mom takes them out to do the business of the pride and to hunt, they are completely in sync. They don't have to go over somewhere and draw out a plan on the ground about how they're going to get that gazelle. They come together and they hunt, depending upon the animal they're hunting. These herd animals They hunt in different ways. And they're just in sync with that. And what I want to read something. We think about what I read with the heart math. Now I want to drop down to a Taoist idea about this. A Taoist writer says, remain united in your heart with another. Remain. Well, what do they mean by that? Remain united in your heart with another. It means, in my opinion, remember the intuition, remember the opening up, remember the play, remember the grooming, remember the connection. That's the place where we can open up. That's the place where we can begin to take on these challenges of our life. We can take on the challenge of being spiritual beings and going through what we have to on our journeys. That, all the great spiritual masters say, our body, I guess, has a shelf life, and we get the lines in our face, and we get the gray hair, and we put on the weight, or we lose the weight, or whatever we do. But we are eternal beings. And so we are constantly collecting this information in terms of who and what we are. And so there is a bond. Jesus was talking about the bond with life, the bond with each other, the bond with our connection. The Taoist writer goes on to say, our model for how to play with others is the higher ideals of spiritual principles, the practice of kindness, humility, correctness, equanimity, and openness. Whenever we depart from these, we lose the aid of higher guidance and risk an encounter with misfortune. If the lioness sisterhood can't do their thing, they end up with misfortune. I heard about, some time ago, about these people who are working with dolphins to try. Dolphins, the way they speak and communicate is through whistles and through things that sound like bells sometimes, but a lot of variety of whistles. Hundreds, maybe hundreds of tones of whistles. And so these scientists have been working for a very long time with a group of domesticated dolphins to try and figure things out. What are they saying, and what are the whistles for things if we call it words? And so they did this work for a long time, and finally they decided we need to go and work with wild dolphins to see because they made headway in this, and to see we're in such a controlled environment with these domesticated domestic dolphins in captivity. I don't know if they're really domestic, but in captivity, that we don't know how much we're kind of polluting the whole scientific thing. So they found a pod of what's called spotted dolphins in the Atlantic Ocean. And it was a wild pod, and they kind of knew the area they roamed for, say, hundreds of miles, where they fed and where they hung out, and where they calved and where they had their lives. So they went out there and they approached the dolphins, the spotted dolphins. And dolphins are very curious, they're very intelligent. And so they will kind of spook away for a while, but then they'll come back. They want to see what's going on. And so they were trying desperately to try and, create intimacy with the spotted dolphins. And they could get so far, and the dolphins are very playful by nature. And so this one day, they hadn't made a lot of headway, and this one day there was a young woman, and she had a very brightly colored scarf on her neck, and she was going to get in the water or hanging over the water, and it was around her neck, and it fell into the water and began to sink. And what they realized was that the dolphins grabbed a hold of that scarf and they started playing a game with it. one of the dolphins would run around with it in its mouth and then let it go, and another dolphin would come in and kind of swoop it up with its tail and run around and let it go, and they were passing it to each other, and they just seemed to be in hog heaven. They just loved it, playing with this brightly covered scarf. And so when the researchers got in the water and they were hanging out watching the dolphins do this, they realized that the dolphins began to try and hand off the scarf to them, to say, hey, you want to play? And they were smart enough to realize this, so they would kind of grab it and wave it around, and when they got really brave, they would snatch it out of the dolphin's mouth. The dolphin loved it when they did that. And sometimes they said, between the humans and the dolphins, they would pass off the scarf, it would start to sink down. It's almost like the dolphins and humans are looking at each other like, who's going to go get it? And so they began to make incredible breakthroughs about the language of these spotted dolphins through the entryway of play, through the entryway of softening the heart, acceptance, opening up. My dad, and I'm going to end with this story. My dad and I, kind of had a challenging relationship. He was a great guy. He definitely wasn't the worst guy in the world, and I don't think I'm the worst guy in the world, but we really had trouble clicking. And so whenever I would try and get in, he was very engineer-like. He was very linear. He worked in powerhouses and around engineering, and I've always worked with people, and I've always been very emotional, and he would call me high-strung and stuff like that. And so later in life, it wasn't long before he made his transition, I was having a conversation with him, and I so desperately, before he left, I wanted to connect with him. And I just hung out with him for a while. He had a little bit of dementia going on, and he was telling me about this bicycle that he had as a kid that he was like 10 years old, and he financed this bike at a Sears, through paper routes, put so much money down, made payments on it and stuff. And I knew about the bike, but he was really talking about it, about how proud he was of it and how much fun he had with it. And my dad grew up in challenging circumstances, and his bike was that thing where he could go out in the world and get away and be his own person. And I just decided to hang out with him on the bike and talk and just listen to what it meant to him, and I asked questions, and I wanted to know everything there was about the bike and his adventures and how he took care of it. When things were bad at home, how he could walk out the door and get on that bike and go do his paper route and maybe not come home for a while, just ride around. And I realized that bike was one of his best friends growing up, if not his best friend, that playful side of him. I was able to tap into, I think for the first time in my life, what I would call his intuition, his openness. My heart center began to soften. His heart center began to soften. And I think that we both found value in each other. Like a couple of lionesses, we recognized each other. Like the dolphins and the researchers coming together on a game. Recognizing each other, trusting each other. I thought it was such a gift that he could trust me with his bike. We live in a time, I think, where we are being called upon to heed the words of Jesus and the Taoists and invite the children forward to show us how to soften ourselves to each other in that beautiful consciousness of connection and intuition. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Namaste. All right. Okay, so